Hello, everyone. Welcome in here to Fighting Ever Fighting. I'm cool Carmody of GoPowercat.com. Before we get going with this video, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. Make sure you like the video, drop a comment if you'd wish. Don't forget to go subscribe to GoPowercat.com. Now, we get into our conversation with Mark Porter, former Kansas State kicker and dad of Kansas State receivers Seth and Shane Porter. Welcome in here to Fighting Ever Fighting. Today, we talk with former Kansas State kicker and dad of two current K-State receivers, Mark Porter. First of all, Mark, thanks for taking the time out of your day to hop on the podcast today. For folks who may not know, let's just say this. You're very active on Twitter. You support your boys a lot. But like I said, you played at K-State way back. I don't want to say way back. It wasn't that long ago. But you and I were kind of talking, it was pre-Bill Snyder. And a lot of people, when they think of K-State football, they think of Bill Snyder. And we'll have plenty of time to get into that. But before we get going, as we have the dogs wander behind on this episode of Fighting Ever Fighting, just let the folks know, what are you up to now? And I mentioned both your boys are at K-State. How did that come about? And what's life like?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's been pretty awesome. Kind of really like a dream come true. I mean, this past season, the Big 12 championship was actually on my 57th birthday. So I couldn't have gotten a better Christmas present or a birthday present than that day, there. It was such an amazing experience. But yeah, so I'm real proud of them. Obviously, they've worked real hard to get where they're at, and still continuing to do their thing. And I moved to Houston with their mom like in 1994, so I've been down here for quite a while. So they've actually grown up Texas boys, but they always had their purple on, and we used to cruise around like in our neighborhood. I got a nice K-State golf cart, and some of the big times we beat Texas, like Ron Prince's first year, we were cruising around the neighborhood celebrating and doing all that kind of stuff. So they've grown up Wildcat fans their whole life. They're adjusting to the weather up in Kansas. Shane's not a big fan of the cold, so but that's kind of the story for now.
Well, I think it had to have been a proud dad moment in the Big 12 championship. You mentioned being on your birthday. I specifically remember on a kickoff where both your boys got in on the tackle and had their names announced at AT&T Stadium. I guess, what was that moment like for you? Because I remember sitting up in the press box thinking how cool that must be.
Yeah, it really, really was. It can go all the way back to their even Shane's redshirt year, to see them both come running out of the tunnel the year before. But this past year, they're both out there on a lot of the special teams together. And then when they can combine, they did that earlier in the year at Fort Worth against TCU, and I've kind of got that video saved, so I sent that out to all my friends and everything. And it's pretty funny because the boys will do something and my phone will start blowing up during the games and stuff. So sometimes it's really kind of cool to have people noticing what they're doing.
And you mentioned you guys raised your kids in Texas. Before you went to K-State, were you a Kansas kid? What was your kind of background like, and what kind of led you to K-State?
So I was born in Salina, lived there to like third grade, then moved to California, and was in California from like third grade till right before my freshman year of high school. Out there, I was just mainly a soccer player. I got on the select teams and traveled and all that kind of stuff. And so we moved back to Kansas. So that would have been like 1980 or 79, somewhere in there. There was no soccer at all. So I went to high school at Sacred Heart there in Salina. And I said, well, I'm going to go out for the football team. I didn't really even know the positions or anything. So I said, well, I want to be a wide receiver, and I think I played wide receiver and linebacker my freshman year. And it was the day before our first freshman game, and they were lining up for kickoff cover. And watching the kid kick from the year before junior high, and he's running back straight on, and with all that stuff. And I was like, hey, can I try, coach? And here I come, soccer style. They'd never seen me before, and it came pretty natural to me, and kind of took off from there.
So you growing up in Salina, obviously, I'm sure you knew a lot about K-State, but K-State, again, not exactly um, the university that people think it is today. Football really changed when Bill Snyder took over and really changed the university. What were your impressions of K-State growing up? I know you were right in the backyard, but I'm curious to hear that.
Yeah, so them in KU, being in the Big Eight, that you were kind of exposed to that, with the sports. So I was, pretty neutral. And then when it came to kind of recruiting, I was kind of getting recruited by both schools to walk on, and I was almost went to KU, and then the K-State coaches kind of came in late, and the timing of things would have been better because K-State had a senior kicker that was going to, so I could redshirt all that stuff. But yeah, it was a lot of fun just to, hang out, see Aggieville and all that kind of stuff. And plus, the basketball was good back then too. So, it was a great decision on my part.
Was that kind of I don't want to say a recruiting tool or a recruiting way to get you to school, but I mean, now people think about KU using their basketball program to get kids to come play football there. Was that something that the coaches actively pursued at K-State?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So when I took a visit to Lawrence, it was just like on a Wednesday afternoon. I took a little tour around the facility, the football facility, and kind of stuff. And they talked to you about, sure, we want you to walk on what you kicked. But then they also kind of started, they knew that I played some receiver too. So I was like, sure. I was thinking that was, at least I'd watched a bunch of their games also. So I was like, this is my chance to play Division I Big Eight football. So I was kind of set on going there. And then locally at the time, there was a guy from Salina, a guy named Jim Otto, who was finishing he played at K-State, was a GA there at the time under Coach Dickey. And then he ended up being a full-time wide receiver coach. So he heard through the grapevine that I was maybe going to KU, and he calls all of a sudden and says, "Hey, are you going to KU?" And I said, "Well, I mean, they offered me a walk-on spot." He said, "Well, hold on, let me see what we can do here." So they bring me up on a Saturday and actually take me to the KU K-State basketball game in Ahern, and it was an awesome game. And I was like, "Oh, never mind. This is much better situation." It sucked me in right off the bat. Ahern was awesome. Having the fact that, a guy from Salina was recruiting me, it was just, things were just pointing in that direction that, I could actually redshirt, which was kind of the plan. A guy named Steve Willis was kicking there before me. So the timing was really good. And Steve had seen me in some camps, and he was like, "Look, this is a situation. You come redshirt and it could be your job." And, it worked out for the best.
So then you come to K-State and you get on campus. You play for 4 years. I believe I did some research before this. You finished with the sixth highest made field goal percentage in K-State history. Didn't know if you know that or not, but
Yeah,
there you go.
I knew I was somewhere in there. I had 1987 was a bad year, which unfortunately, a lot of times I'm more remembered for the bad year because of the toilet bowl game. But we were, and even back then, like the kickers, it's just like everything. The kickers and the athletes and everything, they're just better nowadays than they were back then. I never really even seen myself kick on film till I was almost senior in college. We just didn't do that. You just went out and you just kicked. I went to a few camps and they show a few things in a little bit. So it was all kind of self-taught, how to do that kind of thing. And so it was, we weren't really as dialed in. I mean, even the top guys in the NFL, were 75%, back then, and 75% now. They're getting rid of you.
Yeah. Well, when you get there, what was the vibe like? Because I think, I'm sure you have tons of stories and everybody has heard about what it was like. But you get there, and then I know the infamous gray helmets, and you get the purple helmets with the cat script, and all these stories. And is there a single memory that kind of that you can think back encapsulates your entire playing career at K-State?
Well, I mean, they had just went to a bowl game like 2 years before I got there. So I got there in '84 and redshirted. Stan Weber was a quarterback at that time, and we did have and I thought they were cool, the gray with the KSU. So they had just been to bowl game 82. The 1983 class was pretty loaded. I mean, they had a lot of good players in that class. And, it just, I don't know, it just didn't click. I know Coach Dickey changed, offensive coordinators after going into 85, and that didn't click. And, from a negative standpoint, I guess the thing that I'll remember the most impactful was the way Coach Dickey was actually fired. Some people may know the story, but we lost to Wichita State in the first game, and we were playing Northern Iowa the second game, and we'd lose again. And there's a picture, I think Fitz was on the student paper maybe at that time. There's a picture of the AD, Larry Travis, standing at the top of the hill. We had a little hill, and, with the fourth quarter clock going down, and everybody walked into one entrance, and then the coach's locker room was off this way and the players over here. Well, he grabbed Coach, took him inside, and all the assistants were milling around with us. And you kind of knew, what was happening. And then the next day, we have a meeting, and he's gone. And I was sitting next to a guy named Bobby Besser, was one of our offensive linemen. And he leans over and he goes, "We just got that guy fired." And, as a young kid, just kind of hits you. You're like, wow, our actions not getting it done on the field, cost this man his, career. And so that's from the negative standpoint, and that unfortunately kept the ball rolling. It didn't get better. Let's put it that way. And so, things just kept sliding downhill. From a positive standpoint, the favorite memory would be the 86 game against KU. We played them at home. It was on TV, and beautiful weather. I think it was early October. We would win. I can't remember the exact score, but it was there was riots in Aggieville afterwards, and those stories are true. That stuff was going on, and it was just like such an amazing high, like you so much excitement. And little did I know at the time, that's the last football game we'd win while I was playing at K-State.
And that's where I want to go next, because that kind of starts the train, and the losses continue to mount up. I think people have heard the story, but I want to ask you about your perspective. The last year with Stan Parrish at Tulane, that story kind of came back around this past season with K-State obviously playing Tulane. What do you remember about that day? For the folks that don't know, would you like to share the story? I think it's fascinating.
It really is. So we go down to New Orleans. We're playing in the Superdome. So right away, that's pretty cool. You're used to playing, outdoor stadiums, and you're in this, big old huge dome. And, we've basically, more or less had the game won. I remember I kicked the extra point. We scored with like less than 2 minutes, and I kicked the extra point, I think, and that put us up 4, I'm pretty sure. And so the coaches upstairs, they got so excited, they just left the booth, and they come running down. And one of my buddies actually was a GA at the time, Dave Wallace. And he just told me this like a year or so ago, that he was still in the booth and everybody had left, and he was trying to like, hey, so the communication started going, and it was totally messed up. We kick off to him. I think the first play we had 12 men on the field. Second play was a personal foul or something. So it was like bam, bam, they're at midfield, and then it just kind of kept escalating. And then literally the last possible play of the game, they throw a touchdown pass, and beat us. And I remember going in that locker room, and I went off to myself by the side, because I was a fifth year guy. There wasn't hardly anybody from my class left. I mean, there was just a few of us, Rob Good and Randy Cook, and, some of those guys. And I went off in the corner, and I cried like a little girl. It hurt so bad, because you just get beat down, and you go in there just. We always, you're never going to just say, oh, we don't have a chance. But, that one was so close, and have it ripped away like that. That one hurt, real bad.
And so then to kind of see where K-State was this past season at the Superdome, I believe that was the first time they'd been down there and the program had played in the Superdome since that moment.
Yeah.
To see the 180 where now they're playing Alabama, I can only imagine how cool that must have been for you personally.
Yeah.
I want to ask you also, we were talking before we started recording, the scholarship numbers were obviously not where they wanted to be in the final parts of Stan Parrish's tenure, obviously before Bill Snyder came in. You mentioned that you played receiver in high school. They had you in the rotation at receiver as well as being the place kicker. Is that correct?
Yeah. So my first spring there, I was a receiver and kick, and then won the kicking job and just, kicked. And then we had our pro timing day going into my senior year, and I ran pretty good. And the coaches were all of a sudden like, well, hey man, we're starting spring ball next week. You're going back out there, because they basically didn't hardly have any bodies. And so spring ball goes around, and I'm like within the top 4 or 5 guys rotating in and out of receiver, which was fun because I love being a football player, because that's always like been my running joke. People will you'll meet people out in person, and they're like, oh wow, you played Division I football, and you played for the Kansas City Chiefs and all this stuff, and they're like, oh, what position? And I say kicker, and you can just see this like a disappointment on their face, like, oh, you're not really a football player. So it felt great to be quote, a football player again. But there was some concerns. I was like, wow, I am trying to get to the league, and really be able to focus that. And then luckily we signed Frank Hernandez and Smitty, and those guys came in and did their thing and got at least got on the field.
Well, I understand. As a former long snapper, whenever you talk to people about those specialists, it always brings up some good conversations. So after your final season, you play your last game at K-State, and then Bill Snyder gets announced. What were you thinking when they had made that announcement? Obviously, you're done, you're out of eligibility, you're getting ready to move on, but did you feel like at the time that was a move that would maybe not take K-State to where it is now, but that could elevate the program?
Yeah, we'd played Iowa twice. We played them in '87, actually at their place, and actually that was a pretty tight game. The funny story was we were in a team hotel, and had the student newspaper, and each was on our beds, and the predicted score was 77-0, and we're like, which we never got beat that bad, but we got beat close to that several times over the years. So it really kind of motivated us, and it was a pretty tight game till basically midway through the fourth quarter. So, and then my senior year, we played him again. So we had heard about, his offense was really innovative, particularly for, the Big Ten back then. So there was a lot of, there was several coaches came through. Actually, one named Ron Dickerson, I actually talked to him in the locker room. He was kind of doing the tour. So, you're hearing all these names, and then, they get with him. And right off the bat, I think one of the first things he did was he pulled all us seniors in and had a meeting, and it was, look, lay it on the line. He goes, you guys aren't, you're not going to be here. Let me know what you think. And we just let him, spoke our minds, spoke our hearts, and, really more from the hearts. It was just like, and he talks about it in several of his books, that meeting. And he talks about this was a beaten down group of young men. And we really were, because it's like, you want to compete and you want to win games. And, we shouldn't have been as bad as we were. I mean, we had enough players to at least win a few games, we should, and, we weren't going to be, 7-8 win team, but we should have. All those years we could have won, a lot more games than we did. And to have it happen the way it did, it's kind of indescribable.
And so then obviously the rest is history, right? I mean,
yeah.
Coach Snyder turns the program around, and
mm-hmm.
here you are, 20 years later, and your sons now are members of the K-State football program under Chris Kleiman. I guess, when did you realize that your boys could have a chance to play at the next level? And then when it looked like K-State might be an opportunity, what were those conversations like?
Well, it's pretty good. I mean, obviously, they're playing 6A football down here in Houston. So they were playing about as good a competition you can. And they stood out, and they they were noticeable on the field. So I knew that they had a chance. Obviously, Seth's size, was a big issue. But he, he had, and actually he was a defensive back. They moved him to defensive back his junior and senior year, but that was kind of like whatever, I'll do whatever, to get on the field kind of thing. Dana Demmel at the time was still at K-State, and Andre Coleman was still at K-State, and Sean was still there. So my boys have been going to the camps in the summer, probably from junior high on. And I know one year they had like a 7-on-7 kind of thing, and had different high school coaches coaching. Well, Brooks Barta was coaching my boys, and they showed out pretty good, and that kind of thing. So anyway, after the camp, we were going into the last day, and Dana just nonchalantly goes, "Hey, Seth's got a preferred walk-on spot," and we both kind of looked at each other like, "Are you sure?" And I mean, Seth was on cloud nine, and even his guys, like his secondary, I think all four of them ended up going Division I. They had one signed at Arizona State, one went to Stephen F. Austin, another one went to Louisiana Lafayette, and Seth went to K-State. So, he was used to that. And then this was a walk-on spot, but even his buddies were like, well, what if, so other schools start recruiting from a scholarship standpoint, and they're like, well, what if this school offers you a scholarship? He's like, nope. What if this school offers you? Nope. And then they go, okay, what if Alabama gives you a scholarship? He's like, nope. He goes, I'm going to K-State. So that was, the kind of thing for Seth. Now, Shane's situation was even tougher because he was a quarterback basically all his life. And then they had some receivers get hurt his senior year. And they had, it was actually Colby McAllister's little brother. He was the backup quarterback, and he was a pretty good talent. So they asked Shane to move to receiver his, the last 6-7 games of senior year, which he wasn't real thrilled about, but he did it. And I told him, I go, look, odds are you can be receiver in college anyway. Put some film out there. And he showed out. He made all district and, did his thing. But there weren't as many spots available at the time. And so, we've made it up for plenty of visits. They've seen him. They were looking for more length at the, receiver's position. Shane's 5'10", 6 foot, somewhere in that range. And we kept kind of waiting around. Well, then finally, Brat, I think it was the Iowa State game. I think it was the Iowa State game. They came up and said, look, we want to do, they had to do it as a gray shirt, but it was preferred walk-on as a gray shirt. So Shane stayed down here in Houston, went to school, his first semester, and then he got up there in January with, and he lives with Jake Rubley and Trey Krause, and they got a real good setup that they're really good tight buddies. So it worked out for both boys. Couldn't be prouder of them, and it's just it is pretty amazing that the pictures I get, the texts from people, all this kind of stuff. So it's and then to top it off with that Big 12 championship game, it was we were actually, my wife and I were actually in a booth. A buddy I played with is in sales in Dallas, and he had a booth. So there was several K-State people in there, and we were literally just crying tears of joy, after that game. And it was a lot better than my crying in the Superdome in '88. So it was, to see that is just you can't even really imagine it.
It's amazing how life comes full circle. It really is.
Yeah.
I think to see both of your boys out there in the Superdome against Alabama in the Big 12 championship, I can imagine what kind of surreal moment that was for you. We've talked to Seth multiple times about his decision to come back for his COVID year at K-State, and just with talking with him and talking with you, he seems like the kind of kid who absolutely loves K-State, and that was never really a thought of if I'm going to do it. It's just going to be a matter of when I'm going to tell everybody that I'm going to do it. When he made that decision, how excited were you to know that you get to see your boys play together for one more season?
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, I was more, I was worried because, his body's, they're pretty beat up at that age. He's already joking. He's like, man, I'm not as fast because I'm old. And I'm like, you're not old. Just, get through, winter conditioning and stuff. You'll be fine. but yeah, it was just an amazing experience. I think he went out for senior day at the KU game, and I think then he just realized, hey, you can't just, if you got an opportunity to do this one more time, he's like, let's run it back.
And he's going to have a chance to be right in the mix at receiver this year. But one thing that both of your boys have kind of made a name for themselves at is on special teams. And with you being a kicker, obviously, that's got to be pretty cool. And with K-State being known as, quote unquote, special teams it's a big thing. It's a big deal for K-State. I guess whenever you get a chance to talk to people, and you mentioned how whenever people talk to you and you say you were a kicker, when you talk to people and you describe how important special teams are, I mean, is there any way of measuring the impact that not just you, but your boys have had on special teams and really the whole unit as a whole?
Yeah, because I mean, it's like field position, points scored. I know, like Seth, I can't remember. It was a COVID year. He blocks a punt against Texas Tech, the first possession of the game, and it was so cool. But then I was like, man, it'd be nice to have a full stadium. You could hear that, the roar of that kind of stuff. And then they go through things. I mean, I've got a film clip of Shane making the, solo tackle against the kid from Alabama that got drafted in the top 10 or 12 or whatever. So I'm like, look, that's something you'll be able to show your grandkids forever. And then I think, Seth's play in the Big 12 championship game where he catches the punt, right with like 30 seconds to go. I mean, that was some people forget about that play, and other people are like, look, that was, a pretty big play, because if that ball rolls in the end zone, they just got to go a few yards and maybe get a chance for a field goal. So him and Ty and the whole special teams unit, I mean, they take pride in making those things happen. And so it's good to see them both out there. And then when they, it's nothing cooler when they're both in on a tackle and they get up and you see them high-fiving each other and stuff. That's pretty awesome.
I got two more things before we let you go. I want to ask you now about the kicking position, not specifically for K-State. Ty obviously had an outstanding end of the season, but now K-State goes into 2023 with inexperience at the kicking position, I guess you could say. How hard is it as a kicker to be able to flush everything that's happened before and understand now you have a clean slate? It's a brand new season. You're 0 for 0, and you get a chance to start off on a good foot.
Yeah. So, I had a guy early on in my career. He's like, don't miss the same kick twice. It's like if you miss one, you got to forget about it and stuff. I think the less you think as a place kicker, the better you are. It's just a repetitive muscle memory thing. A lot of it, I kind of, the course of comparisons of a golf swing and that kind of thing. So where you get out there and just trust your mechanics and your muscle memory to take over. Don't think about things. Because I can remember a lot of jogging off field after I made field goals. Sometimes like, man, I wasn't even concentrating then. And that's when I knew I was kind of in the zone. If I got in my own head, those were the ones when, could end up being bad.
And final question here as we wrap up the show. I don't know if you're a man of predictions or not, but I've heard you talk about the Big 12 championship multiple times. Do you have any bold predictions for K-State ahead of the 2023 season?
We just, as Coach Clement says, we just take it one game at a time. So I don't want to getting back to that. I made some bold predictions, but I think they're going to be good. Offensively, I mean, deuce is deuce, so that's a once in a lifetime type of talent. I have heard good things. I saw a couple practices, and I think, DJ being there is going to be strong. The transfer award, I think there was a couple plays. I was like, he looked a lot like Deuce out there. So he's pretty quick. Will's going to have confidence. I think they're going to spread the field some more, and you got all the O-line back, and then you got Big Ben, Senate. I mean, that's a lot to build off offensively. Defensively, he lost two corners to the league, so that's going to be, those are hard to replace. So I would think if we can kind of shore up some of the secondary stuff, you know, from the corners and the safeties, and then, you know, up the middle, you know, Eli and those guys they're pretty tough. I think Uso's the big kid now, but he's going to be, you know, 1 or 2 type play guy and need, you know, getting rotated around. So linebackers, I think that's going to be a strength. So I think we're solid there. So, you know, we're going to be the hunted this year. We're not sneaking up on anybody. So, but I think the way these kids are, I mean, the culture they've created, and that's one of the things that Coach Kleiman, you know, really reiterated. And I can even remember, you know, Seth's second position coach. Sorry, he's been through so many. Coach Ray talked about it at North Dakota State that the players kind of self-police themselves. And that's where it's progressed, you know. So these kids, you know, they take accountability of what they're doing, you know, as representing the program, and they're out there busting it. And so they're going to work real hard this summer, get ready, you know, get kids healthy, and you know, get out there every week and see what they can come up with. And
by God's will, they'll make Mark Porter cry tears of happiness once again at the end of the season. Is that right?
Yeah, let's hope so. And then we'll be I guess I'll be 58 this time, so it'll be quite an experience. Let's hope for the best.
There you go. Mark, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it, and we'll stay in touch and talk to you next time.
There you go. Go Cats.